Hello, MUS 2020 students. Here are some helpful tips to compose in MuseScore, especially if you're not really comfortable with music notation. Tip number one is to keep things simple. When you create a new score, select things from the common instruments that you already know how to use. Things like winds, brass, percussion, basic strings, either bowed or plucked. It is tempting to go through all instruments, world music, electronic music, and find some of the really cool stuff there, but it may be a transposing instrument, in which case you have to make sure that concert pitch is enabled, or it might have other issues that don't translate well. So it's better to get really experimental with the sounds in Ableton Live. I'm going to create a piece, I think, for flute, violin, and cello. These are standard non-transposing instruments. I'm going to hit next, and then the other part of keeping things simple, stick with really easy keys. So if you're not used to writing with accidentals, keep it in C major. You can always transpose things later in Ableton. C major is the key signature with no sharps or flats whatsoever. But if you are comfortable with using accidentals, you can click on the key signature dialog and choose any major or minor key signature. Be aware that there is C major and there's also open or atonal. That is something completely different. You probably don't want it. In here, you can also change the time signature. MuseScore will let you set pretty much any standard time signature and even some very non-standard ones. And of course, you can change the tempo, the number of measures that are inserted by default, and if there's a pickup. For this project, though, that you're going to be working on, I don't recommend using pickups. Finally, you can give it a title. And of course, insert your name for the composer. Then hit Done. There are a number of ways to input things in MuseScore. Of course, you can use the QWERTY keyboard. But if you're like me, that may not be something that you're really good at typing really quickly on. The other options are to use a connected MIDI keyboard . Or the other option that you can use is to hit the letter P in MuseScore. This brings up a piano-style keyboard. With this, I can select my note duration. Then I can click to add notes. Just like that. Another thing to really keep in mind is to save frequently. Control S on a PC or Command S on a Mac is the single most important shortcut. Save it, and then you are set. MuseScore does make a backup, but it may not save everything if something crashes, and then you would still have to go and recreate those changes. So I recommend saving anytime you make a substantial amount of progress. Another tip that may help a lot of people if you're having trouble getting things written down is to actually get out of MuseScore and write things out on staff paper. I put staff paper templates up on the course page. With that, I really do recommend that as a way to get your ideas on paper and then transfer it over to MuseScore. In fact, this is how I actually write pretty much all of my own pieces. One thing that will help a lot of people in writing on staff paper is to do it in multiple passes. To do one where you're just writing out the pitches as blank note heads on the staff, then go back and fill in the rhythmic information, the bar lines, and all of the time signatures as a second pass. It's a little bit more time consuming, but it tends to work really, really well. Within MuseScore, there are some other tricks though. Things like repetition and copying can be your friend. For example, if I want to repeat a passage, like I really like this section here in the flute, I'm going to start the violin with that. I can just copy that and paste it. Then I can even repeat it. And because the violin can play a little bit higher or lower than the flute, I can take it down. We'll have it start on a G, I think. So I'm going to use the format, tools, then transpose, by interval, down a perfect fourth. Oh, but I said up a perfect fourth. Well, you know what? Control Z or Command Z will also work. And then by interval, down a perfect fourth. There we go. Another really useful tip is to keep things simple. For example, the cello part is basically going to function as a bass line. I can get away with using primarily long notes, like half notes and whole notes. I don't need to have lots and lots of fast things going in there that might detract from the flute. So I'm just going to start with a low C, and there's my cello part. Another thing that can be very useful is to include repetition and transformation. So I'm going to copy this measure from the flute and put it into the violin twice. We're getting pretty high up though, and I do want the flute on top, so I'm going to take it down an octave. Then, to add variation, I'm going to randomly delete a couple of notes. Then I'm going to reset my cursor to the beginning. I'm going to do a second pass where, to make it even more interesting, I'm going to randomly take things up or down by an octave. There we go. So very interesting line all of a sudden. I can go through and select multiple notes and add different articulations like staccato to all of those. And I can do the same thing in the flute up here. And we'll hide that piano keyboard. So doing that, I can create some really interesting variations very, very quickly. I also want to make sure that I add dynamics to everything. My cello is kind of the least important thing here, so I'm going to give it a slightly quieter dynamic of mezzo forte, while I give the violin forte, and because it's on top, I'm going to give the flute a forte as well. Here, where the violin and the flute are in sync, I'm going to drop them to mezzo forte, and then take the cello down to mezzo piano, and use that until the end. Because I am kind of a sucker for the effect, I'm going to use a diminuendo on the last note so that everything fades out. Add a diminuendo to the flute here, the cello here, and the violin here. So let's hear the piece. Okay, it's pretty good, but I think I need to change the dynamics, so we'll change the violin here and here, just to keep things a little bit lower than the flute. And let's listen to that again. Okay, I like that, so I'm going to hit Control S or Command S again to save. Then one last thing, if this were my completed piece and I were ready to export it into Ableton Live for the project, I would have a slight problem with all of these extra measures here. So I'm going to select the first one in the flute, hold down Shift, and then select the last one in the cello so that everything is highlighted. Then I can hit Control-Delete on a PC or Command-Delete on a Mac to remove all of those extraneous measures. I hit Save, and then I can export everything as a MIDI file. And if I had any repeats in here, I would want to make sure that Expand Repeats is checked so that it will actually create duplicates of all of the measures that are encased in repeats, so that it will play correctly when I transfer it over. I then hit Export, and it's ready to go. So those are just a couple of tips that I found very, very useful. Hopefully they'll help you out as you're composing in MuseScore, and then sending things over as MIDI into Ableton Live for further processing.